In the summer of 1853, a wealthy customer sat down at a restaurant in Saratoga Springs, New York. He ordered a plate of fried potatoes. A few minutes later, the plate came back. The potatoes were too thick. The chef made them thinner. The plate came back again. Still too thick. After a third complaint, the chef had enough. Instead of satisfying his customer, he decided to embarrass him. He sliced the potatoes paper thin, fried them until they were impossibly crisp, covered them in salt, and sent them back, expecting another complaint. Instead, the customer loved them. That act of petty revenge supposedly created one of the most popular snacks in history. But nearly 200 years later, nobody can agree on what actually happened in that kitchen. Were potato chips really invented out of spite? Or have we all been repeating a story that's simply too good to be true? Long before potato chips filled supermarket aisles, they were supposedly born in one of the most fashionable towns in America. In the mid-1800s, Saratoga Springs, New York, attracted wealthy businessmen, politicians, celebrities, and socialites from across the country. Luxury hotels, horse racing, and lavish dinners helped turn the town into a playground for the rich. One restaurant stood above the rest. Moon's Lake House sat just outside town near Saratoga Lake and became famous for its food. At the center of the kitchen was a chef named George Crum. Even by modern standards, Crum's story was remarkable. Born in 1824, he was of both African American and Native American heritage, at a time when opportunities for minorities were severely limited. Yet his talent earned him something few chefs enjoyed during that era: genuine fame. Customers specifically sought out his cooking, making him one of the best-known chefs in the region. That reputation makes the famous potato chip story even more intriguing. According to the legend, one evening a customer ordered a side of fried potatoes. The dish arrived. Moments later, it returned to the kitchen. The potatoes were too thick. Another batch followed, then another complaint. Frustration started building. At least, that's how the story is usually told. The trouble begins when historians try to verify what happened next. Records from the time are surprisingly thin, and many versions of the story contradict one another. One detail remains consistent, however. George Crum always appears at the center of the legend. The farther researchers dug into the potato chip story, the less certain it became. And the first mystery they encountered involved the customer himself. Ask someone who invented potato chips, and you'll probably hear the same story. An irritated chef, a demanding customer, and a plate of potatoes sliced out of pure spite. Ask who the customer was, and the story immediately starts falling apart. One of the most popular versions names Cornelius Vanderbilt. At first glance, the claim seems reasonable. Vanderbilt was one of the richest and most recognizable men in America. Attaching his name to the story instantly made it more memorable. There's just one problem. Historians have never found convincing evidence that Vanderbilt was actually involved. No contemporary records place him at Moon's Lake House during the famous incident. In fact, the earliest versions of the story don't mention him at all. That detail appears decades later. Once researchers noticed that discrepancy, they started asking harder questions. If Vanderbilt wasn't the customer, then who was? The deeper historians dug, the less consistent the story became. Details shifted, characters appeared and disappeared. Some versions contradicted others entirely. The result wasn't a clear historical record. It was a legend that seemed to grow more dramatic with every retelling. Yet one thing rarely changed. George Crum always remained at the center of the story. That doesn't necessarily mean the story happened. Good stories survive. Great stories become legends. An expert chef humiliating a wealthy customer with a plate of potatoes is exactly the kind of tale people want to believe. Unfortunately, history doesn't always cooperate with a good story, and that raises a much bigger question. Did George Crum actually invent potato chips? Or has another person been hiding in the background of the story all along? The answer may have been standing only a few feet away from him in the kitchen. For decades, George Crum received most of the credit for inventing potato chips. His name appeared in newspapers, food histories, and countless retellings of the story. Eventually, the man and the myth became almost impossible to separate. Yet one person was rarely mentioned: his sister. Catherine Wicks worked alongside Crum in the kitchens of Saratoga. Unlike her brother, she never became famous. History largely pushed her into the background. That might have been a mistake. Several accounts suggest the origin of potato chips looked very different from the story most people know. No angry customer, no dramatic confrontation, no act of culinary revenge. Instead, the invention may have happened during an ordinary day in the kitchen. According to one version of events, Catherine was preparing potatoes when a thin slice accidentally fell into a pan of hot oil. Moments later, something unexpected emerged: a crispy potato unlike anything customers were used to eating. The snack quickly became popular. It's a compelling story, The problem is that evidence for Catherine's role is just as uncertain as the story surrounding George Crum. Most accounts appeared years after the supposed invention took place, and sources disagree on nearly every major detail. That uncertainty raises an even bigger question. Why are historians arguing over two people in one kitchen when the answer might be neither of them? The deeper researchers dug into 19th century food history, the more they discovered something surprising. Thin fried potatoes may have existed long before anyone at Moon's Lake House started serving them. If that's true, the debate between George Crum and Catherine Wicks may be missing the point entirely. Neither sibling may have invented potato chips. They may have simply helped make them famous. And the evidence for that possibility was hiding in some very old cookbooks. By now, the potato chip story was starting to look less like a historical fact and more like a detective case. The angry customer story couldn't be verified, neither could the Catherine Wicks story. That left historians with a different question. What if nobody at Moon's Lake House actually invented potato chips? As researchers dug through old cookbooks, they discovered something surprising. Recipes for thin fried potatoes existed years before the famous Saratoga story took place. One cookbook describes potatoes sliced into thin rounds before frying. Another instructed cooks to cut potatoes into very thin shavings and cook them until crisp. The recipes weren't identical to modern potato chips. Even so, the similarities were impossible to ignore. Food history rarely has a single inventor. More often, recipes evolve over decades as cooks borrow ideas, improve techniques, and popularize existing dishes. Potato chips may have followed a similar path. Thin fried potatoes likely existed before George Crum and Catherine Wicks ever entered the picture. If that's true, what happened in Saratoga wasn't the invention of the potato chip. It was the moment the idea became famous. Visitors arrived from all over America to spend time in Saratoga Springs. Many tasted the crispy potatoes and carried stories about them back home. Restaurants began copying the recipe. Hotels added similar dishes to their menus. Before long, people weren't simply ordering fried potatoes. They were asking for Saratoga chips. The name itself became a brand, and that may have been George Crum's real contribution. He may not have created the first potato chip, yet he helped turn a simple side dish into something people actively sought out. Creating a great food is one achievement. Making an entire country obsessed with it is another. That obsession was about to grow far beyond Saratoga Springs. A restaurant specialty was about to become a national snack. By the late 1800s, Saratoga chips had become far more than a local curiosity. Visitors tasted the famous crispy potatoes and carried stories about them home. Restaurants copied them, hotels served them. Demand continued growing. George Crum recognized that popularity early. After leaving Moon's Lake House, he opened his own restaurant near Saratoga Lake, where baskets of potato chips sat on every table. Guests loved them. Word spread, yet potato chips were still mostly a restaurant food. The real breakthrough came when producers learned how to package and distribute them on a larger scale. Suddenly, chips could be sold in stores, shipped across the country, and enjoyed far beyond Saratoga Springs. What began as a regional specialty evolved into a massive industry. Today, billions of dollars are spent on potato chips every year, which brings us back to the question that started this story. Were potato chips actually invented out of spite? The honest answer is maybe. The famous legend could be true. A frustrated chef may have grown tired of a demanding customer and created something unexpectedly delicious in the process. The problem is that the evidence isn't strong enough to prove it. Other explanations fit the facts just as well. Catherine Wicks may have played a larger role than history remembers. Earlier cooks may have been making similar recipes decades before Saratoga chips became famous, and the story itself appears to have changed as it passed from one generation to the next. One fact, however, seems difficult to dispute. Whether George Crum invented potato chips, improved them, or simply helped popularize them, Saratoga Springs played a major role in transforming a humble potato into one of the world's most successful snack foods. The legend survived for nearly 2 centuries because it has everything: a talented chef, a wealthy customer, a possible act of revenge, and a food so popular that people are still eating it by the billions. The next time you open a bag of chips, remember this: you might be eating the result of one of history's greatest acts of culinary pettiness, or you might be enjoying one of the most successful food myths ever told. Either way, somebody deserves a thank you, and possibly an apology. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Eat This Story for more surprising food histories, culinary mysteries, and unbelievable stories hiding behind the foods we eat every day. And let us know in the comments, what's the strangest food origin story you've ever heard?